Hi, Wes Allen with DM Tales, and today we're going to talk about keeping track of your lore. Roll the stinger. So you're building your own world for your players to play in, and this means you're going to have to keep track of it. This helps create the illusion that this world in which they're moving around is actually living and breathing. People like to keep track of their lore in a whole bunch of different ways. For me, I like to keep track of things like history and political divisions and ideological factions. All those types of things are what help create a well-rounded space in which the players can move. I want to answer questions like, how did the world end up in the state that it's in? Do neighboring kingdoms get along, and why or why not? What ideologies are trying to steer the world, and what are they steering it toward? That's always an important question. And how do the gods of this world interact with it? Are they hands-on, or are they more aloof? From this point, in the way that I keep track of my lore, I create different folders that contain all of these different elements, and then each object in that element creates basically its own article, and I can move these around as I need. And after I've created these basic trunks from which the world really forms, I then create separate folders for my different adventures that take place in it. This will contain things like my scene descriptions and maps, and NPC character traits, and any magic items that I might have created homebrew for the players to use. That way I know where they are and I can find them. I also like to create general plot lines that I use to help steer the characters a little bit. Here's one path you can go. Here's another path you can go. However you want to go, it's fine, but these are the general things that I have mapped out. That really is helpful for me. After each session, I'll go back in and I'll add to these adventure notes. Things like NPCs who have gone from being a mere extra to actually having a personality and a role to play in the story. This happened to me the other night. I like to keep track of what the players have done, what they've accomplished, who they've encountered, and any types of things that they've thrown into the story that they wanted to make wrenches that I'm now going to adapt for part of the adventure. That happens all the time. My players might not care at all about any of this stuff, and that's fine. But for me, it helps me create that illusion of a living world, and it keeps it up and running. The players might not ever have any direct contact with any of it, and that's okay. But it will be affecting the way they interact with this world. Two countries go to war. That's going to change the way that the economy is working. It's going to change what the NPCs are caring about at that point. If they're really worried about being invaded, or there's, long-standing animosity that they're suddenly unleashing, that changes personalities in some ways. The point is, the lore helps me create the ebb and flow that really is going to create the motion in which the player characters are running around in. And that's important. The question a lot of people ask is, what tool should I use to keep track of all this? And the best answer I can give to any starting DM is that you should use a tool that works for you. It's your world, after all, so why should someone else have a say in how you keep track of it? Just find something that works and keep going with it. Some DMs like to use nothing more than note cards that they write on. Being left-handed, I can't do that because I wouldn't be able to read my own notes. Other people like to use just a word processing document or even an online service like Wrangling that's designed specifically to keep track of a role-playing world. But if it works for you, that's fine, whatever tool that you use. However, having said all that, here's some advice that I have on things that I look for when I'm trying to keep track of things like running a role-playing campaign. First, you should use something that you can organize and reorganize rather quickly. This is because as the adventure unfurls, you're going to need to be able to access your information in slightly different ways. You want to highlight NPCs for a week. You're going to need to be able to pull them out and have them quick at hand. It's just the way things are. Any system that you use to keep track of your lore is going to have its strengths and its weaknesses. So there's no real perfect way of doing it. Again, just make it work for you. A lot of folks really do like note cards. They're simple if you've got decent handwriting, which, as I've said, I don't. My problem with note cards is that I can't search them, and I often will misplace things, so being able to search something is really helpful. A word processing document is familiar for a lot of people, and if you use something like Google Docs or Office 365, it's online, and you can use it wherever you are. But you also have to know how to work that tool in order to make reorganization flow well, because word processing documents are meant to be linear. So moving sections around can be a little bit hairy unless you really know the application that you're using. Having folders on your computer and then placing separate documents in them to keep track of all your lore is a really easy way to organize and be able to reorganize. But again, you have that search problem. If you misplace something, it might be difficult to find it later on. Second, you should have it be portable. Whether that's electronically or physical, it doesn't matter. You just need to be able to take it with you places when you go to play. Again, there's pluses or minuses for any method that you might use. Note cards are transportable at the start, but as they grow over time, the deck can become a little bit unwieldy. Notebooks are also good because you can just put it under your arm and just take off with it and be able to flip pages when you need it, but with both of these methods, not only do they grow over time, you're not likely to have them with you wherever you are. So if you have a sudden moment of inspiration, it's going to be a little bit more work to remember to jot it down and get it into that later. Electronic documents can be accessed on any device that we have at the time, but if you need to access a lot of information, sometimes it can be a bit of a hassle to keep all the multiple documents open, or if you're worried about overloading your computer or your system, particularly when you're playing online via a virtual table, you might feel the need to have more than one device open, and that can just add to your clutter. Third, don't use something that you feel like you have to fight in order to utilize. This is probably the most important advice I can give to any DM. If you're using an application, of course, there's going to be advanced features that it's going to take some practice to get used to. But here's the thing. You should only have to use those advanced features if you want to. You shouldn't be forced to use them. For my part, what I like is to use applications that have a rather simple buy-in. I can get into it, there's enough of a familiar interface that I can play around and use the basic functionality without feeling like I'm being cheated. And from that point, I like to explore an application's advanced features. I don't mind at this point if there's a bit of a steep learning curve, because I'm pursuing things that I want to use, and it's not forcing me to use all these advanced tools all at the same time. I get to grow with the application as I'm using it. That's important to me. My personal sweet spot is the writing application Scrivener, which I use for basically all of my writing. This lets me organize all my documents in ways that I want, puts them in folders in a virtual binder on the side, and I can rearrange them at will and add to them as I need. It's also important to know that this is something that can sync with my mobile devices, so if I'm out or about with my phone, or if I'm sitting in a coffee shop with my iPad, and I have a sudden revelation, I can add it to the notes and incorporate that into my game at a later time. So that works for me. If you're interested in Scrivener, I'll put a link to it in the description below, but remember, find a tool that works for you. If you just want to use note cards or a Google Doc, or even an app like the Apple Notes app on your iPhone to keep track of all your stuff, do that. It's whatever works for you. Next week, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the world of Frozen. That's my world in which my players are currently adventuring. And I'm going to talk about how that story is affecting, even now, the adventures that they're on. Until then, happy playing, everybody.